A crisis is really, if you look at one of the definitions of a crisis, it's a turning point. It's risk and opportunity. And the more you prepare, the more you practice, the more that you're able to navigate a crisis before it starts, the more likely you can tip that towards opportunity for um, a lot of people think it's a disaster, a tornado, floods, active shooters, and all of those are crisis events, but so are reputational crisis events, and so are career crisis events. And so all of those fall under the category of if you prepare and practice, the outcome is generally much better for you.
Many people think innovation belongs to a select few with the right title, funding, or perfect idea. What if that's not true? Welcome to Innovate Where You Are. I'm Christy Venny. Each episode, I talk with people across industries, builders, educators, founders, and students who are creating change in real time. We explore the messy side of innovation, the risks, pivots, and lessons behind the work. Because innovation starts with curiosity, takes courage, and begins right where you are. Let's dive in. Today's guest is John Bourne, a longtime public safety leader now helping drive immersive first responder training through the Ohio 360 initiative. We explore experiential learning, trust, and what innovation can look like in public service. John Bourne, you spent decades in public safety, including serving as superintendent of the Ohio State Highway Patrol and later director of the Ohio Department of Public Safety. Looking back, what first drew you to this life of service?
The reward, sometimes it sounds slightly selfish, but the reward that comes with public service, especially when you first start in the highway patrol as a trooper, you're literally the point of public service, whether it's helping someone that's broke down along the highway, responding to a crash. You know, the American Red Cross has a saying that their volunteers get to be the best part of someone's worst day. And unfortunately, sometimes as a trooper, you see that, but the instant reward of being the best part of someone's worst day or establishing stability in chaos is really what kept me in public service. When I first went into it, like anything else, when you're young, you're not 100% sure that's what you want to do. But I knew within a few days of working the road, that's where my purpose was.
What a great reinforcement for you to have that so early in your career. I think a lot of people, you're right, they don't know what they want to do when they're young, but to have a powerful experience where you really feel like your work matters and that you are truly important, you're necessary, you're helping others in their most critical times of need. That's a beautiful statement, definitely. So across your career, you have worked inside some of the most structured, tradition rich environments. I'm curious, how did you become someone who is open to innovation inside of a system such as that?
Yeah, the Ohio State Highway Patrol is obviously known for structure. The uniform has relatively remained unchanged for almost 90 years. It's changed a little, but there's an expectation of public service within that uniformity. So if you interact with a trooper in Toledo or interact with a trooper in Marietta, it's very similar. I know there's a lot of corporations and private sector organizations that try to attain that, but beyond that outward, what I would say display of consistency is a inward push for innovation. So handling a crash is an example of that. The investigation, the techniques, the things that you do, interviewing people, taking witness statements, measuring skid marks are all consistent. But how you do that and how efficiently you can do that changes with innovation. For example, the technology from when I first started in the Highway Patrol in 1987 versus today is just remarkable. The amount of time that you're standing out on a highway with a roll tape versus a laser now that measures that, the amount of time completing a crash report from using a pen with multiple carbon copies of a report versus instantaneously having the computer fill that in for you, all comes down to innovation. And it really is driven not from the top down, but from the bottom up, in my experience. Most innovation comes from the bottom down. And if I just give you one last example,
Yes, please.
when I was a major in the highway patrol. I had responsibilities for the eastern half of Ohio, from Lake Erie to Marietta, essentially from the right half of Interstate 71. And that was one of the best jobs that I had because every day I would stop at patrol posts on all shifts, day shift, afternoon, and nights, and I carried around a yellow tablet, and I would generally start with a question: "What do you need? What can I provide you that helps you do your job better?" And then when I became the superintendent, the colonel, I pulled out that yellow tablet, iced it, and put together a plan. So the innovation actually wasn't me. The innovation came from the people doing the job.
I heard so many things that I think are really important. For example, the perception, perhaps, that an organization that does have a lot of structure, such as the ones you've been a part of, people might think there's not a lot of innovation on the surface because they see the same uniform show up. But beneath that, wow, there are so many layers of advancements that have happened that have been really important to the ability of those individuals being able to do their job. So I think that was a misconception that I had too. I also heard you say, those doing the work, boots on the ground, they know the issues, and a lot of the ideas come from the people that are doing the work. And as a leader, being able to listen is really powerful. You had your notepad. They knew you weren't only listening; you were writing it down. I also think about the trust. You have been in their shoes, you know what the work looks like, and you're able, as you move up in your rank and your responsibility, you still value and know you have to stay connected, you have to listen. I think that applies to all industries, really. Anyone listening could think about their role wherever they are in an organization. How are they listening to those that work in different positions? Things maybe they've done before, maybe things they haven't done, and be curious and listen and write things down. A lot of people might say, "Gosh, you were an expert. Why did you didn't need to ask them?" But you knew. I heard you say, like, "Well, what are they experiencing now that I can take with me to improve what we do, to learn from?"
Yeah, and sometimes it's really simple. An example that I've used in the past, this may sound really fundamental, but it was an example of innovation that was driven by one employee that
Mhm.
I wrote a note on that notepad. And so, a little bit of background in Ohio, on any major highway, you're only allowed to leave your car disabled off to the side, as long as it's not in the travel lanes, for 48 hours. And then after 48 hours, the danger of someone running into it or something bad happening. So, troopers, when they come upon a disabled vehicle that's abandoned, will tag that vehicle. Well, prior to um, 2011, because that's about the year that we made the change, um, the process was to take a sheet of paper, a little yellow sheet of paper, and you would fill that information out about the car. You call it into a dispatcher who would log it, and then you take that piece of paper and put it up underneath the windshield of the vehicle. That creates a danger when you're walking along a berm with a lot of traffic that's moving 65 or 70 miles per hour. Being outside of the car is the danger zone. Fortunately, we've only had a very, very small number of troopers in Ohio shot and killed, but a lot of troopers have been hit or have been in crashes. That's what the greatest danger to a trooper. So minimizing that time outside of the car, especially for a routine task, was an important thing. This employee said, why do we have a process where we have for 50 years put these little notes under a windshield wiper? Why don't we see if we can find a bright green fluorescent piece of paper that has stickiness that will stick on the back window of a car? And that way, when you're only saving 12 feet, but it's 12 feet of narrow lane between the car and the berm. And then any trooper passing can see that green sheet as they approach, and they don't have to stop and check that car again. So now, if you are driving on Ohio highways and you see a car off the side of the road, you'll see that green piece of paper on the back window. That's a tag for another law enforcement officer. That's an officer safety tool that was an innovation by one employee. Really simple, not complicated, not technologically based, but likely has improved the safety of troopers on a daily basis.
Yeah. Could save lives of troopers being out, putting themselves in danger. And it was so simple and not costly at all. It's just a different color sticky paper you're
It actually
using in a different place.
saved us money overall. So
Oh my
tag
gosh.
around 800,000 vehicles a year. So you do 800,000 by, I think it was around 40 cents less. It's a decent amount of cost savings.
That adds up. So not only did it save money, but it kept people safe and it still accomplished what needed done, but in a more efficient way. What a genius idea. And, how many people maybe aren't willing to share an idea because they think, well, it's not a big deal. It's not, maybe it's not the next big thing, but really those little ideas add up and they're so essential that people feel comfortable to share them and make them possible by actually sharing with someone, because if they keep it in their own mind, they're not doing any good. They're not helping anyone. So for leaders to be able to create environments where people feel comfortable sharing ideas is so essential. That's a great example, John. I really love that. So after you led at such a high level, what made you then pivot and decide to continue working at Ohio University and the Voinovich School?
It's a great question. I'm a high university graduate twice. My family had went to Ohio University. I played baseball at Ohio University. That was plan A. I play baseball in college and then play professional baseball. Around my junior year, I thought I might want to be coming up with a plan B because professional baseball may not be in my cards. So I was very familiar, and I liked the concept of giving back. And we had been hiring when I was a director of public safety. We had been hiring a large number of interns through the Scripps College of Communication because the greatest danger in Ohio, whether it's someone dying or someone being injured, is in the 16 to 25 age group. So that's a traffic crash. At the time that I was a colonel and director, opiate overdoses were and still are a significant challenge. Communicating with that 16 to 25 age group, certainly if you're 60 years old, you can do that. But if you're in that age group, you're much more likely to know both the techniques of social media and the messaging that resonates. And so we began hiring a large number of interns from the Scripps College, and as a result of that, I started learning more about what Ohio University was doing. The Voinovich School has a very rich connection to state government and government in general. So between those two, it seemed like a natural opportunity when I left that I still could contribute. And it's been honestly one of the most rewarding things that I've done in my life. I teach 4 courses and then I work on the courses. I really actually probably should be paying the students because I get a lot more out of it than I provide.
Wow.
Of them are working professionals that are attaining advanced degrees and are practitioners in their field. So it's really rejuvenating.
Curious, which types of courses are you teaching nowadays?
So I teach a crisis communication planning course, a crisis communication strategy course, crisis leadership courses, and most people think of crisis, by the way, as a negative. A crisis is really, and if you look at one of the definitions of a crisis, it's a turning point. It's risk and opportunity. And the more you prepare, the more you practice, the more that you're able to navigate a crisis before it starts, the more likely you can tip that towards opportunity. And for disaster, a tornado, floods, active shooters, and all of those are crisis events, but so are reputational crisis events. Um, and so are career crisis. And so all of those fall under the category of if you prepare and practice, the outcome is generally much better for you.
Absolutely. Your students are very lucky to have you. It sounds like with your experience and your perspective, what a phenomenal way to look at things in a very logical and prepared way so that they can be ready for all the things they face. At what point did you start to feel that traditional first responder training maybe wasn't enough for the realities of what our officers are facing today?
It's a really good question. Training falls into 2, I would say, branches or components, is the quality and content and the frequency. A lot of professions take for granted the frequency portion. They have continuing training. In Ohio, although the Ohio State Highway Patrol sometimes was accused of overtraining, we spent a lot of time on training. I don't think you can overtrain, but
Agree.
training time education in general is an expensive commodity for an organization to commit to. So when I was a trooper, for example, in Athens in 1987, even though I had really good training going through the academy and then ongoing training, anytime that I left to go to a block of training, usually an 8-hour block of training, I would take the day off, go to the academy in Columbus, spend the night at the academy in Columbus, and do 8 or 16 hours of training. Someone else was then doing my job as a trooper, or scheduling became a challenge. And because you're never going to have enough people in this profession of public service, regardless of fire, police, you never have enough people. Reducing the amount of time that they're gone, while at the same time increasing both the effectiveness and the longevity of that training, is an ongoing goal. And when I watched what the scripts was beginning to produce, I'm still the director at the time, but I started seeing what they were producing in virtual reality, which is just another form of experiential learning. I
Absolutely.
saw how it compressed that time frame, and that really resonated with me.
So let's talk a little bit more about that, about the innovation. You are starting to talk, you're hinting at this amazing technology, this very collaborative project called Ohio 360. And revolutionary training approach that completely changes what you just mentioned, a typical training experience that you would have had when you were serving, and you would have to go, go on an overnight trip and spend multiple it's days of your time to learn in a more traditional method. And OU has come up with this amazing approach that I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about and explain how it works and what problem it solves.
Sure. I would say that, as I start through this, there's 3 categories of what I'm gonna talk about. What is virtual reality, and how does that differ from augmented reality? What is cinematic virtual reality, the specific type of, uh, training that's included or education included within Ohio 360, and then
Mhm.
experiential learning and the impact of that altogether, kind of the umbrella. Virtual reality training has been around for about 30 or 35 years, particularly in law enforcement, the military, aviation industry, healthcare has used virtual reality. And virtual reality is a headset that you're wearing that puts you into an environment that's immersive. It is Meta Quest or Apple Vision. It's gaming for some in virtual reality, but it essentially transforms you into a different environment. I tell people, if you've not put on a set of virtual reality headsets, which are becoming very streamlined, now they look like sunglasses in some respects. It's like wearing an IMAX theater on your face. Um, so it's not the weight of an IMAX theater, but an IMAX theater or a movie is meant to be immersive. You feel like you're there. And so Ohio University has changed a little bit of how they approach virtual reality, which has mostly been tactical or kinetic. And what I mean by that is most people in law enforcement have been through some type of virtual reality or simulation where you're putting on goggles or you're standing in front of a screen and you're shooting, you're moving, you're experiencing a realistic scenario, but you're being an active participant in that
Mhm.
scenario. Most of that training is either avatars or computer generated. The problem with that is they don't always feel extraordinarily realistic. Avatar or the computer generation person doesn't always do what you're supposed to do. We've already seen that with AI. It's getting better, but it isn't completely realistic. And with law enforcement and military and even healthcare, realism is really important. They have to believe it. So, augmented reality, by the way, which we're not going to be talking about, is looking through the goggles and you can actually see the room that we're in. So, if you had those on, you'd be seeing your room that you're in, but there's projections within that room.
Mhm.
So usually character generated or avatar or animated graphics. Cinematic VR is just exactly what it sounds like. It is using movies within the world of VR to put you as a fly on the wall, to immerse you in a scene, but you just sit still. You don't move around. You're not being asked to do anything, but you're being impacted by that scene. Stanford University has done some research, there's some research in this area, but there's something there that does 2 things. It allows you to remember that experience as if you really had been there
Mhm.
a year, 2 years later, and the key lessons that you're learning stick with you. The other really, really cool thing about cinematic VR is that it reduces and shortens the time frame of commitment. So about 2 hours in a classroom can be boiled down to about 12 to 15 minutes.
Wow.
For law
That's
enforcement,
substantial.
it is substantial, and we've all been through webinars or PowerPoint presentations or a
Mhm.
classroom, and 6 months later, if you would struggle to remember key messages. What we have found in the work that we have done with Ohio 360 and before that called ALLI, Appalachian Law Enforcement Initiative, is people are remembering this years later. They're remembering vividly, just like a real experience. They remember it vividly. And so from a practical side, that allows then the experiential learning for a 22-year-old officer who's never been to a domestic violence, that gets dispatched without a veteran officer for the first time, when they walk into that domestic violence or whatever they're being asked to do, it's not the first time they've done it. It may be the first real time they've done it, but they've done this multiple times in a headset. And then for continuing training, you know, 10 or 15 minutes, that's roll call training. So you could do that 10 or 15 minutes in the reports room, not drive to Columbus, not lose 2 days worth of road time. So it's an efficiency for the organization as well.
Absolutely. And John, so my background's in education, and I've studied different approaches and the research behind how people learn and how things are retained and what's necessary. And it's really difficult in traditional settings how training's often done to fit everything. And I get it, when we're planning trainings, there's a lot to go over. However, you allowed me to come to OU and experience this cinematic VR from the Ohio 360 project. I got to actually wear the headset and to see a scene unfold before me. And I have to say, it stuck with me. This was weeks ago. I can vividly picture exactly what happened in the scenario. And, the thing that I got to see was set in Southern Ohio. There were officers called out to a gentleman who was experiencing what seemed like PTSD from his son dying. And the acting that was in this clip that I was in the experience. It wasn't, I almost felt intruding, like I was somewhere where I was there because of how well the acting was done and how the VR immersion, the technology, how it works. And it was meaningful because it struck my heart too. It wasn't just my mind going through the scenario. Like, if I'd read about it, I don't think I would have felt the emotions I felt from the acting. And the thing I watched, it took through, 2 possible outcomes that could have happened, and then we were walked through the pros and cons of each approach and why one approach was better than the other. And the learning there, it showed the non-example and the example. And in education, that's great. When you can see how not to do something and how to do something, it sticks. And the experience, though, that you speak about, how the approach that OU is taking with producing these high quality training experiences that are experiential and immersive, it is, in my opinion, such a fundamental shift in how we train people. Because, like you said, you could have a young person who is new in the job, who really hasn't had the life experiences or been put in those kind of situations. And now they feel like they have. So they can build on that and become better at their decision making and responding in the way that's going to be best for the humans involved. Can you talk a little bit more about the collaboration that's had to happen at the university in order to produce these high quality experiences? Because I imagine this is not a simple thing to do, and it's not a quick and easy thing. It's not you sitting in a room creating this. Can you talk us through how you put together these
Sure.
experiences, these training models?
Sure, and maybe in the backdrop of how it first started and why we chose law enforcement, but I think it's a great question, and it's a great place to start. law enforcement in general, any public service is time constrained and resource constrained. And by the way, in my view, while the private sector um, has a huge number of benefits and advantages, one of the things that university can bring is a large number of collaborative resources within the university and with the university partners. Ohio University and the Voinovich School, for example, within the mission is to serve the region. If you go to Ohio University, Appalachian region has some challenges, but Ohio University is an anchor there. And one of the things that I think the university has been able to do is leverage their ability to bring those resources together. And so 19 we chose the law enforcement, partly because I was involved, but also because we had strategically thought about if this moves beyond where we're currently using it. And they'd used it, for example, for some training for the healthcare on training doctors to communicate with low-income diabetes patients more effectively, which was it's called the Lula May segment. It's as powerful as a segment, Christy, that you had went through with the law enforcement. Generally speaking, law enforcement tend to be resistant to change. One of the, I came from that world. They're a skeptical, suspicious group of people by training.
Mhm.
Joke within law enforcement community when it comes to training is the only thing that law enforcement officers like less than change are things to stay the same. They're just a hard to please group. And so we thought, they've seen every training fad come through, every technological promise come through. See if we can get their honest opinion before we start moving too far down this path. And so it was called the Appalachian Law Enforcement Initiative. We had hundreds of people within the university, colleges within the university that had not traditionally worked together, law enforcement agencies in Athens that had not worked with the university in this regard. And we produced those two segments, the one that you had witnessed, and we then surveyed law enforcement. It had to be at three things. One, it had to be bite-sized. In other words, short, concise, and impactful. It had to be really easy to use, the same as turning on your headset, and it had to be able to be dispersed geographically and independently. So what that meant is we dropped off the headsets, left them for 30 days. One sheet of paper that was laminated told the officers how to turn it on. And then there's a survey that they could or could not, whichever they chose, to fill it out. We expected not a really high return rate, but we expected maybe a third of the officers to return it. We had a really high return rate. Over two the officers that went through it returned it. And 84% of those officers across all age groups said, "This is how I prefer to be trained."
Mm.
So impactful. And so we knew that within the public service area, if we could have that resistant group, if I can call them that, not resistant people, but institutionally resistant, embrace this, then we could do it effectively with other components within the public sector. And so, ironically, most people would not think that Appalachia, Ohio would be the hub of innovation. They might think of Ohio University, but Appalachia, Ohio, Southeast Ohio collaboratively developed. So the content, we had deputies, we had police officers, we had mental health professionals, we had a forensic psychologist, we had community activists, all working on the script together. And that's the secret sauce. The professional actors certainly executing when we film, but the collaboration to make it realistic. So if you put this headset on and the night before you'd been to one of these scenes, it felt the same.
Mm.
And so we have people on scene making sure everything looks and acts, all that points towards a realism. So I started to say the irony in this is the place where most people would never expect innovation to occur has now shaped law enforcement training for the state of Ohio. So we have
Mm.
1,000 police officers that have access to this through the Ohio Peace Officer Training Academy, which is a collaboration through the Attorney General's office. And we are now working to scale that up nationally. So this approach, Southeast Ohio, not only changed the world for those officers, changed the world of training for law enforcement in Ohio, but we will now have an opportunity to change how law enforcement is trained in the United States.
John, that is such an amazing accomplishment. And I know it's still going. This is not the end. You are really moving this forward. But I want to take a moment just to point out that you gave all the reasons why this maybe wouldn't work or shouldn't work. But some of the things you did in your approach, I think, are really key. Maybe you're working with a group that has a more resistant mindset to change and innovation, which is a good thing. You know, that's a trait that I don't mind having in people that are keeping me safe. There, it's not a bad thing. But I do hear you say that you went to all of the experts and you worked with them. You were trying to solve a problem that something that can help them to be the most effective at their job, which is something they care deeply about. They're in service for a reason, and you're trying to help them to be able to learn as much as possible to be prepared for that important work. And then you sought out the experts in all the different facets of the work, pulled them in, invited them to join the conversation, and built this solution together. That collaboration with the professionals and then back at OU with the teams that helped to produce to create this, it seems like the most amazing example of how true innovation comes from this huge collaborative effort. That seems foundational to this project. I don't see how it could have been pulled off without it. So you had mentioned that, I want to go back to the actual production of this. So the team at OU that helped to create all of this, because this is pretty advanced technology that you're creating, and to do it well and not have it feel cheesy, that's got to be a challenge for your team. How did they work through creating this true storytelling through this cinematic VR? Instead of what we often maybe associate with like role playing games and things that are more cartoon like or avatar like. How did they develop that approach?
It's a really good, good question and point. Universities in general, and a high university and Scripps College, obviously, I work there and represent them, but 32 years of my life I didn't, and I might have had a perception of academia and of professors, but extraordinarily talented in both creativity and background. So one
Hmm.
of the key writers in this, the director, um, used to write professionally as a screenwriter in Hollywood. In fact, he
Okay.
wrote the last episode for Columbo. But they're training, they're essentially a talent factory. Universities are talent factories. And it's based on research. This is not just a profit making avenue. Obviously,
Hmm.
universities aren't in that business, but it's research based with really creative people. And early on, the gaps in knowledge was recognized. We don't know what someone that is administering antibiotics in a potential health attack for a public service position in health would do. We don't know what nurses do in emergency rooms to recognize signs of sexual assault, but we can involve those people early on and law enforcement early on, and then have them own this as we move through the process. So I don't think, what's the phrase? Success has many fathers or many parents, and failure has none.
Yes.
There are a lot of people that should take credit for the success of this because there's a lot of people that made it successful. One point that I want to make about this is the scalability, and that's the part that we're starting to work on, and we get to in a minute. But
Hmm.
producing a movie is expensive. So we use professional actors. And so if you're going to produce something that you're only training 5 or 6 people, this is probably not a cost-effective way to do it. But when you start getting into double digit, triple digits, or more than that, like we have for law enforcement in Ohio, it's extraordinarily cost effective. So around $20 an officer to go through one of these trainings, and it's repeatable. So the segments that you watch, Christy, you could watch again and you'll pick up things that you didn't catch the first time.
Hmm.
Talk about innovation. We produce these. What we didn't recognize is the innovation that the Ohio Peace Officer Training Academy and the executive director, a guy named Tom Quinlan, runs that academy. What they have done is to now innovate how they use that tool. So the segment that you watched is responding to a person in a mental health crisis. And there's a couple outcomes that you can have. Sometimes you can't change the outcomes, but sometimes if you have just the right information before you walk into that, you can have a positive outcome. We didn't realize that they would use that training segment in 6 additional courses. So they use it not just in responding to a mental health crisis, but they use it to train officers on report writing, on testifying in court, on assisting victims and witnesses, on getting people mental health help beyond that initial call. So this wrapped into the course. No longer do you have that kind of, like you said, cheesy role playing in a classroom that it's hard to take each other seriously.
Right.
To now I get to put the headset on and I come out of the headset and I have a discussion with the instructor and the other class members about what I saw and what I did and what I would do. So
I want to talk more about that, John, because I think that's really important. I know the segments are pretty quick, which is an advantage. You know, maybe it's a 15-minute segment that they're wearing the headset, they're immersed in the cinematic VR, experience, the scenario. But once they take the headset off, they've already had the experience. They've learned probably themselves internally. They've watched, they've taken something away, but then they take the headset off and that's it doesn't end there, right? You mentioned like if it's in a situation in a training, there's probably more. What happens then?
So it can be a standalone, and
Mhm.
that's how we did it with the Appalachian Law Enforcement Initiative. With Ohio 360, it is a tool that you can use either alone or in conjunction with additional training. Example of that is we produced a segment called Buddy to Boss, which is not law enforcement. It's for all public servants. And in public service, one of the challenges, the department that I had, we had 4,000 employees, most of whom didn't wear a uniform. They were people like you and I that went to work every day. If they excelled at their job and they wanted to be promoted and become a supervisor, many times they found themselves being promoted and supervising the same group of people that they were peers with. What we found is in the public sector, there's very little training that goes into preparing someone for that. And so there's really difficult conversations you have to have with your previous peers as you're now the supervisor because they may think, you know what, you're trying to get me to leave at exactly 4:30, but I used to watch you leave at 3. Well,
Mm.
how do you navigate that? That course specifically is that tool is specifically best used in conjunction with a discussion or a course afterwards. So it's a good tool to put you into it and then have a discussion afterwards. But the ability to tailor this is really where I think the unlimited potential of the tool can be used.
I could definitely see it going in so many directions. I hadn't even thought about that application. And you mentioned, one clip can be used in several different kinds of trainings for officers. So the applicability of it, the ability to transfer to other areas is great. One of the other things that I think I came away with was the experience I mentioned, it had an emotional component to it. It really my empathy level was super high for the person experiencing the distress, and that was created by how it was portrayed. It wasn't just, a situation that unfolded, it was seeing the response of the one officer and then seeing the response of the other officer and putting myself in the shoes of the person going through the horrible moment in their life. How do these skills, these empathy skills, these observational skills, active listening, some of the things that are harder to train, how can a project like this that's so realistic and combined with maybe, things afterwards or before, connected experiences, how can that really help those keeping us safe to have practice with these soft skills and empathy?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it hits at a lunch that I had. When you buy people lunch, sometimes you gain trust early on, and in law enforcement, I'm joking a little bit. I bought lunch before we started this project with 2 police chiefs and a sheriff that I'd known for a long period of time.
Mhm.
At the end of that, I said, "Hey, it looks like we may have some funding to produce something through virtual reality," which I had to they had been familiar with tactical virtual reality, but not cinematic virtual reality.
Mhm.
What's the number one thing that as leaders of your agency, you would want us to see trained? And almost like a choir in a church that was singing off a songbook, all 3 of them exactly said the same thing, emotional intelligence.
Wow.
And I said, I don't even know I don't even know what that is." I'd been head of a state agency, I'd been head of
Yeah.
the highway patrol, I had not heard that. And they said, "We're getting a lot of young people that are really skillful, but don't have life skills. Training life skills is extraordinarily difficult." And so that's the one area of cinematic virtual reality that I think has an advantage over everything else. It isn't hard skill training, it's not
Mhm.
technical training, it's the soft skills or the things that we used to just call ability to communicate. So if you
Mhm.
can communicate effectively with people and you recognize signs of things before they escalate,
Mhm.
it keeps you safe. Because it was developed by law enforcement for law enforcement, officer safety and public safety were the 2 underlying themes that we made throughout. So I think that hard to articulate communication skill or life skill is the strength of cinematic virtual reality.
Absolutely. I could see many populations who would benefit from having these experiences to teach them those skills that they might not have had the experiences to learn. For example, neurotypical or neurodiverse individuals that maybe don't read the emotions as well, to be able to see it, talk about it, learn how to identify it would be extremely valuable. Or individuals who just haven't had exposure to the kinds of experiences and don't know how to respond or haven't processed it, it gives them that kind of like a safe area where they can go through it without having to be in a real situation that they're required to respond to and keep people safe. It also makes me think about trust. Trust is a big thing in our society, and it's a really important component that the officers, that the populations they serve to be able to build trust. Do you think this technology can also help them to increase the trust and safety with the communities that they serve?
Absolutely, and I have a little bit of background in that area. In 2014, shortly after becoming the director of public safety for Ohio, the governor at the time, Governor Kasich, had formed a group because of a series of fatal shootings across the United States and in Ohio, including a 12-year-old boy in Cleveland named Tamir Rice,
Mm,
formed
mhm,
a collaborative board, and that first board was called the Ohio Community Police Task Force. There were
mm,
24 members on it. Myself and Senator Nina Turner co-chaired that. And if you've ever had 24 people in a room, the likelihood of getting agreement on anything, including what day of the week it is a challenge. But in 90 days, we produced 7 core recommendations that all struck at trust. So in the end, we started finding commonalities. And the commonality is everyone wants to be safe. It's a fundamental right, a fundamental need. Officer needs to go home safe. The public needs to have a safe outcome if it's possible. And so
mhm,
we began focusing on that thing that we should all trust, and that is the ability to be safe. And what I have found is trust is difficult once it's lost over time. And so if you can establish trust early on, and even through the administration of this training, there's a lot of skeptical officers that put those headsets on thinking, I've been through this before. I don't trust it. I'm not really that interested in it.
mm,
Became our greatest advocates after. And so one of the challenges we've had as far as challenges moving forward is talking about this. We're talking about it in a two-dimensional way, but Christy, you put the headsets on. You experience three-dimensional experience. So our challenge is that the more places we can scale this and use it and people experience it. And I think universities and high university, obviously I'm biased in that regard, but I think universities have a unique credibility. This is not a moneymaker. This is not for profit. This is
mhm.
an investment in the region, and it carries the academic credibility of research. So this is grounded in the people that actually do the job and the research behind that.
Well, and with your leadership too, the roles that you've held in our state and the experiences you've had being a part of this work is so essential because you've got the opportunity to work with the researchers and the experts and those who can create the technology, but then you are partnering with all the people, the people that are actually using it. It's just this magical mix that makes for the best outcome. And I can see this why this project has been so successful. Were there moments when you watched officers or people going through the trainings that came out of these scenarios that you realized, wow, like this is going to change how we do training, that you knew that this was going to be effective?
Actually, there was one moment, and it was at the end of the production of this. Although we had had law enforcement engaged experts, people that are on these calls on a daily basis helping us develop it. Ultimately, the decision makers, the leaders, those same people that I had lunch with had not witnessed the end result. So we brought them into the room at the end of this, put the headsets on them. You're wearing headphones. And I remember thinking, when they take these headsets off, we either wasted a lot of money and time or we have validated where we're going to go. And I won't say his name, but it was someone that I've known in law enforcement for 30 years, a very straightforward person. There is not a lot of fluffiness to him. And so when he took those off, and it's the first time he's had a device like that on, he took it off. He first said, "Wow, this is how I want all my officers trained." I knew at that point that that lunch early on had paid off and that, we had something. So it's been on as won an award from the FBI National Associates, a national award. It's been published in a number of professional publications, and probably the best validation is it is now one of the core 7 components of the, training that the Ohio Peace Officer Training Academy has built, their training curriculum around.
That's fantastic. I mean, that speaks for itself. It says how important and impactful it's been. And for your colleague who, if it passes muster with this guy, we're on to something. We all know folks like that. It's good to have them to push back on our thinking as we're building new solutions, but what also a great celebration when you finally win them over and you think, gosh, we're on to something here.
It was relief is what I would say.
Because you put a lot of effort into it. I mean, this has been a massive undertaking. One thing that stands out to me in the experiences that you're creating for these trainings is they're not always designed to show just the right way to handle something. So it seems like there's purposely built in some ambiguity. People make mistakes in these trainings, and you feel uncomfortable watching it because you're like, "Oh no, he's doing it wrong. He's doing it wrong." The one I watched, that's how I felt. I'm like cringing, and it impacted me. It made me really think about, well, what is he doing wrong? What would I do differently? In a lot of trainings, they'll tell what to do, just the right answer. This is what you do. You need to remember this. How does this approach you're taking, where it's not always just one right way and it's much more complex than that? How's this effective with your trainings that you're creating?
Experience is one of the best teachers, and I learned that in my career. The more experience you have, the more perspectives you have, the better outcomes you have. And so that experience is not just in the headset, but it's the discussions that take place outside that headset. And so the 1-year officer is in a room with a 10-year officer. They've both been through the same scene, and there's a difference between legally allowable and the best outcome. So you can have a legally allowable thing that can change your life forever. And I don't think there's anyone that I've ever met in law enforcement or any public service that wants an outcome that's going to change their life for the negative. And sometimes that happens. And even though it may be a legally allowable outcome, use of force, for example, it still changes your life. And so the best thing to do is you do your job, you go home, you feel like you made the world a better place that shift or that day, and allowing people to do that in a very safe environment in a headset is what experience is about. We really are. There was a chief when we first were doing the surveys. I talked to him about this, and he had not been involved. It was in Southeast Ohio, but he had not been involved in the production, only in the distribution. And I said, honestly, what's your honest opinion? beyond the surveys, and he said, "It's experience in a headset." And so we actually took that phrase and have tagged that it is experience in a headset. You're gaining experience without being there. Now we're applying it in other areas, within other public sector areas, so that when a volunteer goes to work, for example, at a place where maybe health is at risk,
Mhm.
it's not the first time they walked into that volunteer environment, even if it is, but it's not the first time. They know what to expect, and the anxiety level of walking into that is lessened because you've been there before, just not in reality, in virtual reality.
Mhm. Well, it sounds like you've really been able to take this project that started small and it's been growing and growing. You've mentioned several different possible directions and use cases, ways that it's starting to spread, and you're getting support. But I'm wondering, so if I'm listening to this and I'm hearing you talk, you make it almost sound easy. And I'm guessing this has not been all easy because nothing is. Have you faced any pushback or negativity, skepticism as you've been trying to build this from the ground up? And I'm curious if someone is a leader in a role where they would love to do something innovative like what you're doing in their own industry, how do you advise them? Because I'm sure you've navigated a journey. It's been a twisty, turny journey, just like anything that is going to be scaled, especially in the work you're doing. I don't know. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that to other people who are trying to navigate big organizations and be innovative.
It's a great question, and the, short answer is that we have run into challenges and obstacles, but 2 things have got us through this, and I think 2 things will get us through it as we begin to figure out how we scale this up beyond just the state of Ohio. One is adaptability, and the other is communication, and both of those go together. So, we listen, and when we listen, we don't just hear, but we listen and use those sometimes criticisms or skepticisms, and we adapt. And so the original idea may not look like what we first thought. The people that ultimately are going to be the judges of this are the ones putting those headsets on their heads and
Hmm.
eventually just the glasses on their eyes. So adaptability and communication, and that creates ownership. If you're telling me, "Hey, I don't like this because A, B, and C," and then I change A, B, and C, and then I show you, you're gonna feel like you own that a little bit. Even you maybe you've moved from skeptic to a little less skeptic, or maybe you've moved from skeptic to owner.
Hmm.
Yeah, anytime you do something new, you don't know the outcome. We didn't know the outcome of this. We still don't know the outcome of this. We don't know what the end of the story looks like. But as long as you're listening and adapting, you have an opportunity to keep that innovation alive.
Well, and we could talk about this honestly. This could be a full day conversation. You could lead a workshop and it wouldn't be enough because there's so many elements to this work. I'm curious when you think about the future of Ohio 360 and what's ahead, what excites you the most?
I think the applicability beyond just public service
Uh-huh.
and the role that universities will play. Again, I have not spent my life in academia. I have a master's degree, but not a PhD. I bring obviously experiences that I brought to the university, but that's one of the, I think, the values of a university in general. I have told people I don't think that many institutions in the United States can do this except for universities with the credibility of that experience that people are gonna be moving through this. So anytime you predict the future, you're at risk, because you're gonna be wrong a lot. But in my view, if you look back 20 or 25 years, online degrees were new and not very many people doing it, and people were skeptical. Then fast forward 15 years ago, students at places were getting iPads or laptops given to them. I actually believe that virtual reality, and specifically cinematic virtual reality, will be one of the core tools that higher education and education uses in general to deliver certain types of really, really important information for people to gain experience without the consequences of real life experience.
I certainly hope so. It sounds like such a great tool to use. And I know in public education, my world is K-12. It was. I see such promise for that as well. Young people being able to have experiences in a safe environment and take chances and see what happens, to see scenarios play out. There's nothing like that experiential learning, and to be able to do it at scale, like you said, technology gives us the ability to do that, and I love to hear that you're harnessing that and actually using it, and pretty quickly developing all of these experiences, these training experiences, and looking for what's next. It's great that you and OU and your partners in public service are all really a part of this. It's such a powerful initiative, and I really am excited for people to hear about the work that you're doing. If they want to find out more about this, where could people go to learn more about the project?
Without using the Indiana football coach's statement about Google me, if you Google, Ohio University virtual reality, it'll take you to the Grid Lab. It'll also take you to Ohio 360, and you can learn more about what we've done, where our plans are. We do demos throughout the state as much as we possibly can, and we've done them nationally and internationally as well. But if you have the opportunity, get a virtual reality headset, if it's a cinematic virtual reality especially, and you
Mhm.
kinda see what the future looks like.
Great advice. That's wonderful. Well, we only have time for a couple rapid fire questions. We'll make them fast because I'm sure our listeners are probably curious about you too and where you get your inspiration. So, is there a public servant, a leader, someone who shaped your thinking, John?
I think I had 3, and it was the first 3 field training officers that I had as a trooper. The best job I ever had in my life was a trooper. I worked night shift for 5 years, 8 at night to 4 in the morning, and I had 3 coaches, all had different perspectives. All of them retired from the organization, and they definitely shaped what I think later became my life purpose. I won't name them by name, but they were the ones that allowed me to fail, but in a way that I still could be successful. Any one of the 3 could have fired me. Any one of the 3, and they had 20 days each with me, 20 working days each with me, but to this day, I still am forever grateful for what they did in planting. And then more broadly, obviously, family's critically important to me and all those people that you interact with. You never know where inspiration or motivation is going to come from until you look back and you realize the value of it.
I hear that from a lot of guests. This openness to what's out there and paying attention, being open to receiving inspiration or about innovating. What's one misconception that people have about innovation in public safety?
In my experience, they believe it comes from the top. Or if they're not at the top of an organization, they feel like they don't have an opportunity to innovate either within their area or broadly scaled to the organization as a whole. And it's been the opposite of my experience from the person that worked at the bottom of the organization through the top of the organization. The strength of innovation comes from the people that are doing the work. Leaders just need to embrace that, listen, and then empower. We used to talk about 2 major things that a leader can do effectively, especially when it comes to innovation. One is vision is articulated by the people that are doing the job, and empowerment, empowering the people to do the job that you've asked them to do.
Said. Okay, last question. What gives you hope about the future of public service in Ohio?
People's life, it's been my experience that regardless of the field, obviously first responders, police, fire, EMS are very visible. But some of the most inspiring people that I saw in public service are the behind the scenes people. One person in particular still works at the Department of Public Safety. I still stay in touch with him. I just saw him. He has some physical disabilities. He rides 2 buses every day, gets dropped off, walks every day despite some physical disabilities. That's driven by life purpose. That's what motivates me and gives me hope.
That's beautiful. John Bourne, it has been such a pleasure learning from you today. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with us.
Christy, thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening to Innovate Where You Are. Check the show notes for links and resources from today's conversation. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can do that at buymeacoffee.com/Christy Venny. Until next time.